Hi, I'm Gary, and this is the commercial EV Musings podcast, the BTB version of the EV Musings podcast that we all know and love. This episode of the commercial EV Musings podcast is proudly sponsored by Valor Power, delivering modular plug-and-play EV charging built for commercial fleets. VoltStation helps fleets accelerate the transition to electric with smarter, faster charging infrastructure. Now, today on the show, we're joined by the founders of Valor Power, the company behind VoltStation, which is a factory-built energy storage and EV charging system designed to remove the traditional complexity of electrification projects. So, can we start with a quick introduction, please?
Hiya, Chris McInerney, one of the co-founders of Valor Power and the VoltStation.
I want to start discussions like this, or I like to start discussions like this, by asking for a little bit about your professional background and how you ended up founding Valor Power. So, what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I started out my career as an electrician. Spent about 10 years working as an electrician, everything from housing right up through commercial industrial buildings. Didn't like working in the cold and wet anymore, so went back and did a master's in energy. At the time, fortunately, unfortunately, first child, mortgage, etc., had to work full time, so went into M&E consultancy. Worked sort of at everything from schools right up through. Was working on large-scale hospital complexes, like the Ulster Hospital here in Northern Ireland, and I also went on to do the Facebook data centre in Dublin as well. I also then went on to set up my own business, doing front-of-the-meter battery storage. Did Ireland's first distribution connected utility scale battery storage project and battery. Went on then to run Exxon Ireland, who are a large EPC contractor. That's then where I bumped into another co-founder, Darren Donnelly, and we decided to come together and create Valor Power.
So, what sort of background does Darren have?
Darren has a background in manufacturing, as well as amongst other things. He ran STC Trailers, which were UK and Ireland's largest trailer manufacturer, which he sold back in 2018. Darren's a serial entrepreneur and does various other things, his other engineering businesses in steel, etc.
So I'm guessing your backgrounds are quite different, but I think they play very well together, quite complementary. So I'm guessing that played a lot into how you built the business and the product. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's correct. We have two sort of opposing but very much combined backgrounds. So my background's electrical engineering. Darren's background is manufacturing, and those two qualities come together really, really well, especially whenever you're talking about the products such as the VoltStation. They complement each other.
And in your careers, I assume between you, there've been experiences that have sort of had a certain amount of influence on how you approach things like problem solving and leadership on a day-to-day basis. So what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so in the past, past experiences are projects, have various different issues with them. That's made us very focused on how we practically deliver a project or a product. In engineering and manufacturing, you come across issues all the time, which are, that's where your engineering comes into it to solve those. So you're always very focused on how you can practically solve any of the issues that arise, and then how you deliver those products.
And if you look back into your background, your previous experience, particularly in sort of electronic engineering and manufacturing and battery storage, what was it in there that made you think, yeah, I think there's these challenges that are around and this is how we're going to tackle them? What was it that sort of sparked that?
It's mostly around the grid. That's one thing that's very much the same across all different sectors. Whenever you're going through looking at different sectors, whether that be in energy storage, the EV market, even just down to your business, everybody has the same issues at the minute. That's grid capacity issues, getting connected to the grid. So those are the sort of things that keep coming up that we thought, look, there's a real market here to have a look at and help people solve an issue.
And I think when you look at something like that, there are multiple different approaches that you can take. And I think what determines the way a particular company approaches this goes very much down to sort of the internal philosophy and the vision. So When it comes to building things like energy infrastructure, what is your personal philosophy?
It's really keep it very simple, and that's something that we brought to the product from day one. Keep everything simple for the end client. In the background, it's very, very complex in terms of dealing with what the end customer wants. What do they have available to them? So, if you're looking to electrify your business, looking at what size of grid connection you have, what you're trying to achieve. But we wanted to keep it very, very simple for the end user. Whenever we created the product, that's we wanted to make it very, very modular. The central systems based around energy storage and the brains and an overarching software. And then we wanted to make sure that all the auxiliaries, so that's your EV chargers that plug into it modularly, that's all kept very simple. So a client can come and tell us, what their problem is that they're trying to solve, and then we can pick from our system and keep it very simple. We also wanted to make sure that the systems were, reliable. So that's using prior contacts, from experience, using certain levels of tier one manufacturers for batteries to make sure that whenever you buy a product, it's really, really simple. You plug and play, and it's reliable for the lifetime.
You've touched on a number of different things there that I want to loop back to as we have this conversation. Things like software, operating systems, and that sort of thing. But now I know, or I'm pretty sure that you and Darren both have a background in complex real world projects. Now, I've done similar things way back in the midst of time with like multilingual, multi-country software implementations. And I know the frustrations that keep coming up again and again and again related to projects. Now, obviously, they're different in software and hardware. So talk to me a little bit about the frustrations that you've encountered as you've gone through and tried to put these kind of projects in place.
Yeah, so it's the same across the board. Whenever you come to look at these projects, and whether that's EV charging, energy storage, sort of anything electrified, you come across the same issue. So, number one is usually the grid, and that's either you can't get additional grid, and or it's an extended period of time. A lot of people are seeing grid connections out to 20, 40 plus. Then you add in the cost of that. Then once you get the site, you're looking at issues around the civil engineering, which can add a significant cost onto it. And the other things are, each project you look at, it's looking at bespoke design, which introduces more risk around the grid, the civils, and then just how that incorporates with your wider site context.
And I think as you're doing these kind of things and you're encountering these issues, there must have been some kind of sort of a light bulb moment when you realize that, well, maybe there's a different way to approach this. Did you have that kind of a moment?
Yeah, so we were looking into the EV charging, and the electrification of everything. Whenever we decided to have a look at it, and the whole narrative around grid constraints and delays, was becoming more apparent, and that's when we sort of spotted, oh, hang on a minute, we're on to something here. So it was taking that idea and running with it, of EV charging, energy storage, making it into the one integrated product that was transportable. So that was sort of the light bulb moment of, oh, hang on a minute, nobody else is looking at it from this point of view.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think I want to come into a little bit more detail, dive into the company itself in a second. But before we do that, I want to sort of do a little bit of crystal ball gazing. How do you see the future of energy infrastructure evolving over the next, 10 years or so? Where do you think it's going to be then?
Yeah, the future is going to be, it's moving to modular factory built. That's where the Volt station comes in. You can keep control of the quality. And so by building everything in the factory, keeping control of the quality, then you can roll that out at a far faster pace. It's removing the risk for the end client as well. So if we can look at what the client wants, build that in the factory, it's a quick turnaround. The client gets what they want, very, very high quality, and at a short time space as well.
Are there any risks from your point of view for doing it that way?
It removes the risks, so it does. That's one of the main reasons to do it then. You're removing all the risks around once you get on the site, having to deal with the civil engineers, structural, electrical design. We combine all that in-house then. So you're actually, it makes the process a lot simpler for us as well as the end client.
Let's move on a little bit, talk about Valor Power as a company. What's your, you look forward over the next few years, what's your ultimate objective? Where are you going to be in 10 years' time?
Our objective is to really remove infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, grid upgrades as the barrier to electrification of everything. We've created a product where we see that we can support businesses, the government moving forwards with the electrification of EV fleets of all your business. So that's where we see ourselves over the next few years.
And I think it's very easy to come out with a statement like that. But strategically, how are you making that happen?
Strategically, we're making that happen by developing our own factory here in Northern Ireland. We have access to a space here that we can manufacture at scale. So that allows us to scale up very quickly and meet those targets.
How is that being funded? Are you funding that through debt, or is the Northern Ireland government providing funding to help you do that?
No, we're funded ourselves through the wider Valor group.
Okay, cool. So how closely because you've talked about the objectives, how closely do they align with what you're seeing in the wider energy and EV markets generally?
So in the wider market, everybody's seeing the same issues. It's grid constraints. The speed of deployment of assets. Everybody wants to electrify. The push is there and the incentives are there. If you're talking about like EHGVs, we can drive down the cost of that price per mile. So our objectives do align with seeing the constraints there where people are struggling, and that's where the VoltStation comes in to help speed up that deployment of the infrastructure.
We've mentioned VoltStation a couple of times already on the discussion. For listeners who might not be familiar with it, what is VoltStation? At its simplest form, what is it?
At its simplest form, it's a central product that's based around energy storage. So the central product is the brains of the system with energy storage attached. And then we can also then modularly attach things like EV charging. We're able to go and speak to a client. Maybe they only want energy storage. Then maybe they're going to go on their electrification journey for their vehicles. So you can bolt that on. But then what we also have done is we've created a system, the VoltOS as it's called, our operating system, which sits over the top of that. So you get one integrated package.
And I want to come back and talk about VoltOS in a second. But when you say to me, it's integrated battery storage, in my mind, I see a 40-foot container. Is that what it is? Are you bringing one of those in and plonking it down on the customer premises, or is it something a little bit more refined than that?
It's something a bit more refined than that there. So we have our integrated skid system then with our own branding on it as well to make it really look good. The system's modular, so you can scale it up in cabinet sizes and then plug on your EV charging onto the side of it, which can all be branded then as well.
One key thing that I think you've emphasized a couple of times is the concept of integration. So why is combining energy storage and EV charging into one system so important?
It's very important because it unlocks that higher scale of ultra rapid DC charging. Whenever you get into looking at, that scale of charging, so like your 200 kilowatts, 400 kilowatts, even up to your megawatt charging, that's whenever people start to come across the grid constraints. It's very, very difficult for businesses to have that level of grid connection and then actually have to pay for the standing charges and things like that to support that, which is why our product fits in there well. You can have a very, very small grid connection or no grid connection at all if you want to do it off grid. Then the integration of the battery storage and the chargers then allows you to utilize that small grid connection, a larger battery, and then charge at your 400 kilowatts plus. So it's a really an enabler, and it's very, very difficult. It's not as if you can just pick, here's a battery and here's a charger and stick them together and they work. The actual technical capabilities of your battery very much come into play the same way as your chargers. And then the software to run that there and be fast enough to deal with the ups and downs and the changes, and that is actually very difficult to get to work as a cohesive package.
Interesting. So how is VoltStation, how is that offering different from traditional EV charging or or a battery project. I mean, I know you've just mentioned that, but talk to me a little bit more about, you still need a grid connection. You can't just magic power up from nowhere. Even if you put solar panels on, you're still going to have constraints about that. So, why is this different?
Yeah, the Volt station is different because it allows you to pick and choose what inputs and outputs that you have. So if you go somewhere, if you have a very, very small grid connection, you can utilize that, boost it up with battery. Obviously, there's a limited time then it can charge in that grid connection, which is why then we designed the system so that you can have various different inputs. So we can accept inputs from solar, wind, if there's any biofuels like HVO, hydrogen, etc. So you can play about with different scenarios for different customers. Some customers might have large spaces at their premises where they can deploy additional renewables. So you can play about with what your inputs and your outputs are then to get a solution for that client.
What are the customer benefits of factory building and commissioning the entire system in advance? Because if I'm looking at this, in my own mind, if somebody's on site, I've got input into what's happening. I can have a lot more control as a customer. And yet you're pushing this to say, well, no, we're doing this all off site. We're doing this all in our own factory. So what are the benefits? What is it I'm not seeing from that point of view?
Well, the benefit to the end customer is that it's all built in the factory, commissioned and tested in the factory. So they know the product's there, it's working, it's delivered to site, and it's literally plug and play. So instead of spending a lot of time at the customer's site installing, having to do the testing and commissioning there on site, we do it all in the factory. They know it's completely working and it's delivered to site. So they're up and going. Generally we deliver the Volt station out and within an hour, it's up and going ready for the customer to use.
And does that also include any attached charges?
That includes everything. So whatever the customer specifies, that will all be commissioned in the factory. And then whenever it's delivered out, it's already been commissioned and operational.
Now, as we're having this conversation and recording, this week I've released an episode of the Consumer Podcast, which discusses the user experience at chargers. What does the software do to make the experience as seamless as possible, or not in many situations? Now, I'm assuming, and you've already alluded to this, VoltStation isn't just hardware, right? So talk to me a little bit about the software, how that works into the system.
Yeah, so our software system, the VoltOS, is a completely end-to-end system. So it looks at your energy side of things. So, it can be plugged in looking at your business, what load you have in your business, what's the spare capacity that it can charge the batteries at. And that it can also, discharge back into the business as well as getting grid system services. It's a complete overarching software package where it looks at every aspect. So you can plug in your energy storage, you can plug in your EV charging, you plug in your business, and then it looks at what the best use case is to reduce your costs. But it can also function as a CPO software where we can make the chargers public facing as well. In various different places, they'll offer grant schemes if you make some of your chargers public facing. So we integrate with payment systems as well, so we can facilitate that too.
Sweet. Let me dig into that a little bit further, because just prior to coming on and recording this, I received an email from Octopus saying, "Oh, would you like to participate in a charging saver session this evening, where we minimize the amount of grid input that we're using?" And as you know, companies like Octopus and others also have the opposite, which is, we've got a lot of renewables on the grid, use as much as you can. Are there links between VoltOS and the grid so that you can actually capture those kind of triggers?
Yes, there is. So that's one of the main things that the system's been designed around. So it's about control, optimization, and monitoring. So we have links then. We have an API basically that can take signals in from the grid. So whenever there's negative pricing times, we can accept that there. It instructs the battery to charge then, and then you can avail of basically getting paid sometimes then to take that electricity, which then drives down your overall costs.
And is that regardless of which grid you're attached to? Now, obviously, you're Northern Ireland based, but I'm assuming that you want to put this in the UK and maybe even in Europe. So is your API able to connect with any kind of grid to understand those kind of triggers?
Yes, it is. Yes. So it's grid agnostic, so we can do it in the UK, America, Europe. It doesn't really matter. The software set up then that any of those grids can interface via the API we have.
Now, the other thing that sort of comes out of the discussion I was having on the consumer part of the podcast is there's a lot of the user experience. Now, I'm talking particularly with the chargers now. The user experience is not always ideal. Now, you've mentioned earlier on that you can actually manage the charge point management system on the chargers. Does that override the software that's within the chargers, or is it complementary to that?
No, they're complementary to each other, so they are. So they work hand in hand, and that's part of the development that we do in house, and part of the testing and commissioning in the factory to make sure that those all work hand in hand. And one of the other philosophy things that we've taken on board is, being an EV driver myself, you go out somewhere, you can't get connectivity onto the app, which is why all our products have Starlink enabled. So it means that no matter where you're deployed in the field, you can always get a connection. Then people at the vote station, if it's public facing, then there's a free Wi-Fi that they can get onto to make sure that their apps are working. But again, we can also do, we're plug and charge compliant as well.
Like plug and charge. Big fan of plug and charge. Slightly controversial question. The impression I get from the discussions that you and I have had is that you're very much focused on the hardware and the integration. Now, should a company which is focused on hardware, such as battery provision and chargers, should you be spending your time developing software? Are they two complementary skills, or are they sort of too diverse for you to be good at both of them?
No, the two skills complement each other, and you can't have one without the other. My experience going back over the years is that the two need to work hand in hand. It's what I alluded to earlier on. Various people will think, oh, we can just go and pick any system, and I'll pick this charger, I'll pick this battery, and try and make them work together. But it's not as simple as that. You need to use the both of them to go hand in hand to make sure everything works seamlessly.
Now, your background in manufacturing has clearly influenced the physical design. Talk to me a little bit about how that shaped the way VoltStation looks from the outset.
The whole thing around the vote station is that we wanted it to be transportable. So the actual system that we built that integrates everything onto the skid, that was the main driver behind it. It's what shaped, what physical size it was. So it means that we can easily transport it. It fits in the back of a lorry with a high ab, and that also played into, looking at the weights of the system as well. So everything's been made modular, so it fits on the back of a lorry with a high ab, so it means it's really, really easy to deliver to site.
And why is designing for manufacture and scale important in energy infrastructure? I mean, surely a battery is a battery is a battery. You make one this size, you can make one that size.
It's important because it allows you to scale up quickly. We wanted to make a product that was agnostic to different markets. If you go and look at competitors or anything like that, there, other people in the market and energy storage, they'll have different products for different markets. Whereas we wanted to create a very, very modular product that was able to go to different markets without fundamentally redesigning it. The technology moves on very, very quickly. You've seen how quickly the rollout of MCS has come along. So we have designed a system where, as the technology moves on, we don't need to keep redesigning our product. Keeping it as a very, very standard range that's very modular lets us suit whatever the end client requires.
And I think the downside to that is that companies nowadays are very aware of risk when it comes to projects it installs and new technology. And we're living in a world where there is a defined way of installing chargers at sites, for example. And the use of batteries is not something that's widely, there are a couple of people that do that, but it's not widely used. Talk to me a little bit about how that approach reduces the risk compared to things like traditional on-site construction projects.
Yeah, so the way we do the construction of the system and the integration of it reduces the risk because we're doing it in-house. We've already done the test, and you're sitting in a factory environment. You're using your software, the battery, the chargers, and it's a fully integrated system. Whereas if you try and do it the other way, you don't know whether those systems will all integrate together. Whenever you get to site, you're on the ground, the client's expecting the system to have worked straight away, except you're having to go through that whole process. Whereas doing it in the factory. We have it tested, commissioned, working before it even leaves the door.
Talk to me a little bit about potential customers. Very sort of easy question. Who are you targeting as potential customers for this product?
Well, it's wide and varied, and that's why we designed the product like that. So any generally we'd be looking at people like fleets, logistics companies, but as well then because the system doubles up, it can be anybody that has a business that's looking to electrify. If you're moving to using electric vans, for instance, but equally it works in the construction sector, hotels, even temporary power users as well.
And are you looking for somebody with a minimum potential fleet size or a minimum footprint?
We don't need that there. The way the system's built, because of being so modular, it can be somebody that maybe only wants us to transition a couple of cars or vans right up to very, very large fleets of, a few hundred vehicles and anything in between.
And I'm assuming that somebody with a few vans is going to want a smaller Volt station than somebody with 100 vehicles. So what kind of sizes do Volt station come in?
Generally, the size starts at 100 kilowatts power, 100 kilowatts, and about 261 kilowatt hour storage, and then you can modularize that up, and we can go smaller if a client requires, but it's usually built up in that modular way, and we can go up to megawatt scale as well.
So let's imagine a customer who has, for example, they've got access to a reasonable a grid connection. And the choice they've got is I can go the old-fashioned way. I can get a traditional grid connection or maybe a containerized solution, or I can go for your product. Why would you expect or why would you like a customer to choose your product rather than going for the traditional way of doing things?
Because our system turns everything on its head, so the client doesn't have to bother with civil engineering, getting in the various different designers, electrical, structural. Our system also comes with all the components integrated, the software, the battery storage, the chargers. Then on top of that, it's all built in the factory and delivered out the site. So it removes all the barriers around, dealing with the grid constraints, having to get a larger supply in. So you're stripping down the amount of time that it takes to deploy the end product that you want. Plus, once you add in all the various factors of removing the civil engineering, we can take up whatever a client wants and deliver it out in a very short space of time. Whereas whenever you're doing it the traditional way, it could be years in the future and a lot of money as well by the time they get what they want.
And is there the potential for somebody to come to you and say, right, I want this kind of Volt station with this kind of power and this kind of capacity, because it's going to be 3 or 4 years before my grid connection is ready. And then in 3 or 4 years' time, the grid connection can come in and they can say, right, thank you very much. You can now take that off and use that somewhere else. Or is this kind of it's a permanent thing? Once it's in there, it's in there. And even if you get a big grid connection in there, you've still got to keep Volt station in place.
It's completely up to what the client wants to do with it. That's the reason we've designed it like that there. So the system's completely transportable. So if they so wish, they can get it in, and it can be, like a temporary solution for a number of years until they get their grid connection. Quite why they'd want to remove it at that point, I don't know. Once you get in and use it, you'd see the benefits of it. But equally, if they want to move it on, maybe they have another business within that same group, they can just lift it and move it on or sell it on, whatever the case may be for them.
Talk to me a little bit about where this approach has made a real difference for a client or project. You don't have to name individual customers if you don't want, but I'd like some understanding of where this has been good.
Yeah, so we have a customer, and you'll see the video is out and about there on our YouTube channel. So we've deployed it to those guys. They are making their transition to EV. Their vans, cars, but they had a very, very small grid connection. So we delivered the product to them, and now they're enjoying the benefits of being able to charge at very, very high speeds, get a lot of the vehicles through, and be charged off of that very small grid connection.
One of the things that is kind of my personal bugbear when it comes to particularly charger sites is the amount of support, the helpline that's associated with that. So you've talked a lot about putting batteries in, you've talked a lot about chargers, you've talked a lot about the software that you're putting in and linking it all together. What sort of after-sales support are you providing both to the people who have purchased this solution from you and to the users who are going to be coming in and using this on behalf of the customer?
Yeah, so as part of the whole package, we offer a full end-to-end O&M. So if you buy a system from us, then we'll maintain it then for the length of the contract. It's, the physical day-to-day of, whatever filters need changed and fluids need changed. But then as well, as part of the VoltOS, a 24/7 helpline there as well, so that if it is a public-facing charger, if somebody comes up and they have an issue, can't get it to charge, etc., there's a 24/7 helpline there where there's always somebody at the end to help you.
You mentioned a contract there, and I think that brings up one topic that we haven't covered, which is the pricing model on this. Do people buy the hardware and the software from you, or is it leased? Is it loaned? Is it rented? How does that work?
It works in every single way that you've just mentioned. We can sell it if it's a cash sale. We can also offer fully financed packages. Plus, we also have deals with rental companies if somebody wants to rent the equipment as well. It's really down to what the end client wants.
So, Chris, we're just approaching that time of the year now when all the big shows and exhibitions are coming up. I know I did the UK Charging Infrastructure Symposium here in the UK a couple of weeks ago. We've got the Commercial Vehicle Show coming up in a few weeks' time. Where am I going to be able to see you at a show nearby? What's your aim for the next couple of months?
Well, you just missed us. We were at the SMMT Electrified show, which was very good.
Didn't get an invite,
we also
unfortunately.
You should have sent you an invite. We're also attending the CV show at the NEC in Birmingham, as you've just mentioned, which the Volt station will be there on the stands. Anybody's welcome to come down and chat to us. Also, we'll be at RTX as well.
I'll definitely see you at the CV show. We'll do a little bit of video together in there and get something posted up on the socials there for you. How about that?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Now, I know we did touch on this earlier, but do you want to say a little bit more about who you as an organization would potentially be targeting as specific businesses? Because generically, just about any business could benefit from that. But do you have specific examples? If there are people listening in a specific sort of industry, just list a few that you think might benefit from having a Volt station installed.
Yeah, we'd like to sell into various different markets. So it would be like, EHGV around, the fleet electrification, construction companies, quarrying is another one, ports, airports, emergency services, and other things like the postal service as well.
Are you in discussion with people like Guy Hayden from AeroVolt, who's looking at putting chargers in at different airports? I think the two of you might be able to work together there to provide a great solution.
We aren't at the minute, but we would welcome it. We're talking to some others that we can't say because under NDA. But yes, if anybody is looking to work with us, they can certainly reach out and we can have a chat.
Now, we're approaching the end of our discussion, so I want to ask a couple of final questions related to your future customers. So for business leaders listening to this episode who are struggling with grid access or electrification timelines, what would you say to them?
I would say reach out. We're always here to help. Just reach out and we can discuss what your needs are and we can always come up with a solution for you.
And how can people learn more about VoltStation or start a conversation with you and your team?
The best place to find us is to go to our website, valorpower.co.uk. There's actually a really good FAQ section down there as well, which people can go and look at. And there's our info at valorpower.co.uk. Drop us an email and one of our team will get back to you.
Last comment from you now, Chris. If listeners take away one key message from this conversation, what do you want that message to be?
The one key takeaway is that we're here to help. The electrification journey is not easy, but with the use of VoltStation, we can make that very simple.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for your time, Chris. I think that's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks very much, Gary.
If you or your company listening to this want to be part of a similar discussion on the podcast, please get in touch with me at the address on your screen now. And thanks for listening. Bye-bye now.